being able to sit with those really difficult emotions that come up when you're dealing with infertility, the sadness, the anger, the grief, is the hardest thing to do. And we were never taught what to do with these difficult emotions. You know, as children and as young adults, we are taught to avoid them, push them away, but we are never taught to work through them. Welcome to the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. I'm Jennifer Edmonds. I'm a yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, meditation and breathwork coach. And for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. This is the podcast that blends both science and spirit with everything you need to know as you navigate your fertility journey. If you're looking for a way to support your physical health, your mental health, reduce anxiety, and reclaim some joy back into your life to make the process of trying to conceive feel easier, then you've come to the right place. I'll show you how to apply the latest scientific research along with your energy and mindset to provide you with all the tools you need as you're trying to conceive. This is the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. As I record this, it is about a week before Christmas. It is getting very hot, very steamy in Sydney, which I know is very weird for all of my friends that follow me who live in the Northern Hemisphere. And I thought it was really timely to bring you this episode that you're about to listen to. I first met Sarah Reece on Instagram. What drew me to her initially was that she's also a yoga and meditation teacher who specializes in working with women going through fertility challenges. But she is so much more than that. And as you're going to hear today, she has decades of experience as a coach and a mentor. And the way that she is able to explain the path of infertility, her own personal journey, is one of the biggest stories I think I've ever heard. But she's able to explain how the emotions of this journey affect you and how you can move through them in a way that really resonates with me. Sarah is the founder of Open to Life, and she's an infertility coach, a yoga and meditation teacher, as I mentioned, and she's also the host of the Navigating Infertility podcast, which I'll add a link to in the show notes. And if you don't already listen to her, I highly recommend it. Sarah helps women to climb out of the infertility burnout hole so they can rediscover their joy before they have their baby. With over 20 years of experience as a facilitator, a coach, and a yoga meditation teacher, Sarah brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the support she offers. Her own fertility journey was marked by a decade of struggles, including pregnancy loss, IVF, ovarian tumors, invasive surgeries, and eventually egg donation and surrogacy. Sarah has been through it all. She draws on this experience as well as a lot of evidence-based modalities, including acceptance and commitment therapy, which she goes into in a bit of detail, mindfulness, neuroscience, and nervous system health. She hopes to empower women with the skills they need to transform their experience of their fertility journey, hopefully enabling them to reclaim their lives and move forward with greater clarity, resilience, ease, and joy. So let's hear from Sarah. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Jen, and I'm very excited to be here this morning.
Thank you. It's so rare I connect with fellow Aussies. I feel like this kind of work takes you all over the world. So it's so nice to know you're sort of up the road, a bit further than that, but sort of up the road. If you don't mind sharing, could you please tell us a little about your journey and your personal journey and the work that you do now?
Sure. So I actually started trying to have a baby when I was 36. So that was actually back in 2005. And I went through this process of, I think, which a lot of us do, which is thinking that, I'm meditating, I eat a healthy food, I've got a healthy lifestyle, I do all the things. 3 months in, I'm going to be pregnant and on my way. And I made that assumption. And that was certainly the experience of everyone around me. 6 months in, I was starting to get a little bit panicky, and I it kind of threw me for a curveball, to be honest, because I thought it was going to happen before then. So I went and saw a fertility specialist, and they said, look, don't worry, if we get to 12 months and you're still not pregnant, we can do an ultrasound and then we'll take it from there. So just before the 12-month mark hit, I actually did fall pregnant, and it was a very early pregnancy loss, so I didn't quite get to heartbeat scan. So I went to a different fertility specialist this time, and they said, let's do a routine ultrasound just to see what's going on. So went in, did the ultrasound, was thinking it was going to be pretty routine, and it was anything but. So what they found was a 5-centimetre tumour on my right ovary, which on the day they said it's malignant. And so within a couple of hours, I'd been referred to an oncologist in the same medical centre where I had the ultrasound done, which is where my fertility specialist was. And within 2 days, I was scheduled for surgery. And I stated to my oncologist, because I obviously didn't have a lot of time to research and find someone that I wanted to use, I said to them, look, you can take the right ovary out, but you're not allowed to touch anything else. I want to have time to talk about it based on what you find when you go in. So they went in and they found that this tumour had metastasised across my uterus and onto the left ovary. So they removed part of the left ovary. And when they did the histology, they found that it wasn't malignant, but it was borderline. And so the challenge with borderline tumours is that they quite often spread and those tumours become malignant. So I was in a race against time, you could say. So fast forward 6 years, and I got to the stage where I'd done multiple rounds of IUI, IVF. I had done lots of surgeries because the tumour kept growing back. I'd had multiple pregnancy losses. I was knee deep in a pit of grief. In fact, probably not knee deep, probably up to my neck. And so I felt that the further things progressed on my fertility journey, the deeper in that hole I became. And I got very familiar with this space of really challenging emotions. And even though I worked in the space of training and coaching, I've been doing that for about 25 years now, and also was trained as a meditation teacher at the time, and had a lot of kind of knowledge that went around that. I didn't have a roadmap for being able to deal with that level of intensity of emotion. And at the time, I made a commitment to myself. I made a vow to myself that when I got through my journey, I was going to start a business to offer support to other women, and in particular, to hold the space for them in that most difficult, excruciating part of their journey. And so when I started to look for tools to free myself from this process, I very much thought of it both in terms of myself and what I could offer others as well. So just to complete my fertility journey, it took another several years. It was 10 years all up, but I ended up having to have a hysterectomy. And we ended up using an international egg donor and did 2 international surrogacy processes to complete our family. So it was a massive journey, and we had a lot of things go wrong with that part of the process as well. So one of the countries we couldn't get out of, so I was left there alone with my baby. That was the second surrogacy process. And with the egg donor arrangement, we had a donor agency embezzle $20,000 from us. So we had a lot of things go wrong. And the first surrogacy process was no picnic as well. So it was an epic journey. But what I've found was that by doing the work that I'm really keen to share today, when I was at the most painful part of my journey, and that was needing to have hysterectomy and not have a biological child and not be able to carry a pregnancy, I was actually the happiest I'd ever been in my life, because I had learnt these skills around this emotional liberation. And so that's very much what inspired me to start Open to Life.
Goodness, Sarah, what a journey. Thank you for sharing that so openly. And gosh, I mean, you meet people in this space of work that all have a journey, but sometimes you hear one like yours and you think, just why? Why do things have to be so incredibly complicated and difficult? And I suppose that there is only one way through it all, and that is by finding ways to manage it and to cope. And gosh, I have so many questions for you. And I think I'd like to just start at this idea that you speak about so much about infertility grief and the different forms that shows up as. And, you know, like everyone, I've been through many phases of grief in my life for different reasons and different events, but there was something about the grief of infertility that rocked me to my core. It's so primal. It's so unspoken about, you know, and I would love to get your thoughts on why the grief of infertility is so impactful.
Yeah. Look, I really have come to form quite a close relationship with grief, and I really sought to understand it. You could almost say I studied grief because I thought by being able to, I guess, deconstruct it a little bit, it meant that I was able to not contain it, but integrate it more and understand what was feeding into what. And I think the most obvious thing that makes the grief of infertility very unique, well, there's a couple of things. One is that we are grieving for something that, or someone that we have never met. And I think that is what makes the grief of infertility so disenfranchised. So it's a form of grief that society doesn't recognise and understand. And for that reason, this is why we get these insensitive comments that are minimising and dismissive, because people simply can't understand what it's like to grieve for someone that you've not actually met. I think another unique part of the infertility grief is that we don't have this single point in time that enables us to move past it. So it means that we kind of have this cyclical aspect to it. So we have the renewed grief every single month and every single cycle. But then there's this ambiguity around it too, because we don't know when the end point's going to be, and we don't know when and how we're going to get past this experience that we're having. So I think that makes it really unique as well.
Plus, there's all a good point. Sorry, you keep going.
Oh, no, please.
Just that idea of that end point. And, you know, when you think about grief, often people will bring to mind loss. And when you lose someone you love, and as hard as that is, there is a really finite point in time where that happens. And then you don't move forward straight away, but you start to work from that point. And you're right, with infertility, it's the grief of every month, every cycle, every round of treatment, every time you're invited to another baby shower, the grief just keeps going and there isn't an end point. So I think that is extremely important to note.
Yeah, and it just layers. There's all these different faces of grief. So as you mentioned, there's the grief of secondary losses. So we do lose that sense of belonging because we want to go to the baby shower, but we can't because it's too hard. And then we feel like we don't have a place that we belong with our friends. Maybe we grieve not feeling like a real woman, or maybe we feel that loss of self-esteem because we feel like a failure. So there's so many different phases of grief. There's the grief of potentially losing our genetic pathway, or maybe having to face not becoming a mother. So there's just so many different forms of grief, but I think underpinning that is the two big ones, which is people not around you not understanding. So it's a very lonely and isolating form of grief, but also that ambiguity where there's that no single point of time, as you say, where you can kind of move past it. So it's a big one. And, I think there's a lot of things that make infertility hard, but I think it's all those different types of grief, but it's the way that it touches so many aspects of your life as well, which makes it very consuming. Yeah.
So all-consuming.
So all-consuming.
Oh. And we all know that feeling. Oh, gosh. One of the things that drew me to you, so we met on Instagram, which is where I meet so many of the amazing women that I work with. So you are a yoga and meditation teacher, which of course, there's not that many of us that work in the fertility space. So I found that exciting when I came across your work. But you're also a fertility coach and you run a really holistic business. And one of the things that you speak about a lot is this idea of dysregulation of our nervous system and how that impacts the body and our emotions and our journeys moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about how the infertility journey can dysregulate your nervous system and what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for your body? What does that mean for your journey?
Absolutely. So this is another topic that I'm really passionate about because I feel that there are certain tools that you can put in place, certain strategies you can put in place on your fertility journey to support yourself. But unless you have this foundation of the capacity to regulate your nervous system, it's like nothing really sticks. So nervous system dysregulation is really about an imbalance or disruption to the normal function of the nervous system. And if we think about the two kind of binary states, this is simplifying it, but there's two primary binary states to our nervous system. One is our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest state, which is what we're in most of the time when we're not feeling pressured or stressed. And then we have fight or flight, which is where, our amygdala, which sits in the back part of our brain, is constantly scanning the environment for threats. And when it picks up something that it perceives as a threat, it pushes cortisol and adrenaline into our system. And that puts us into this aroused state. And it doesn't have to always be something that's life-threatening. It could be trying to run for the bus. It could be having to present at a meeting at work. It's normal to be in a state of stress, and in some ways having stress helps us perform in our life. But the problem is when we are going through infertility and we're in a chronic state of stress, the dysregulation occurs when we can no longer downregulate after stressful events. And so having a regulated nervous system means the brake and the accelerator between stress and calm is working. It's flexible and it's adaptive. But when we're dysregulated, it means that it's kind of that accelerator is stuck on stress the whole time. So what happens is, we have things like the chronic stress of infertility, the hormonal imbalances that we experience, the stressful thoughts and mental health, which then causes changes in our brain structure, which means we form neural pathways that perpetuate fearful thinking, disrupted sleep patterns. All of those things contribute to chronic stress based on what we go through on our fertility journey, and then we get stuck in that cycle where we just can't escape that dysregulated nervous system.
And so what happens to your body, and in particular, what happens to perhaps the impact on your fertility when you're in this state for a long period of time?
So if we think about the reproductive system, it requires blood flow. And, looking at the Chinese medicine lens on it, it's very much around blood flow. It's around having balanced hormones. But when you're in a prolonged state of stress, that blood flow is constricted to the reproductive system, and the whole hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, which is all linked to the brain, that becomes disrupted as well. So it interrupts the effective functioning of that. So the nervous system is connected to every single function in the body, and what happens is it makes it harder for us to be fertile and to hold pregnancies as well. And I know that there's, very much a narrative around the fact that stress doesn't cause infertility, and I would agree with that. But there's no doubt that, it's not our fault if we're stressed, but there is no doubt that having a regulated nervous system enhances your capacity to get pregnant and stay pregnant.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And the question I get most from students is, is my stress going to affect my next IVF cycle, or is this going to have an impact on my ability to conceive this month? And look, the answer to that is so not simple. And you're right, this stress doesn't cause infertility, because we know that women in very stressful situations fall pregnant every day.
Yeah.
Like, you're right, it is this idea of it making things harder and perhaps prolonging the duration of the infertility process. But the thing about the nervous system dysregulation that I think is the hardest is that it affects your life in so many ways. You mentioned disrupting sleep. I had chronic insomnia when I was going through IVF, and I was, thrown on sleeping tablets on top of the cocktail of hormones that were given as well. But not just that. I mean, prolonged periods of stress make it harder for you to access critical thinking, make decisions easily. It, makes you want to withdraw. It makes you not feel joy and not want to live your life in the way that we should, and we should be able to. And the fact that infertility can take so much of you in this situation is the saddest part. So what do you think it is that makes it so hard to confront the process and like the challenging thoughts and the emotions that come up as we are going through these times?
Well, obviously it's the intensity of them, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. And maybe if I could talk about my own kind of journey of awareness through this.
Yes.
So when I was going through infertility, I had trained a lot in cognitive behavioural therapy because it was part of what I did for work. I used to work, I do a lot of work in the corporate space, and I've done a lot of training around emotional intelligence was one of those things, and cognitive behavioural therapy, which is very widely recognised therapeutic process in Western psychology. And this is a very crude summation of it, but it's really around recognising how your thoughts influence your behaviour and then influence your feelings, very, very crudely. So I was turning a lot in the depths of despair to cognitive behavioural therapy. And over time, I was doing a lot of cognitive reframing, which is trying to see things from a different perspective, trying to look at how my thoughts were impacting how I was feeling, trying to change those thinking patterns. And it was all very cerebral. There was nothing somatic about it, as in there was no coming into the body. And it all demanded some sort of resolution and fixing. I was left exhausted, and it actually, I think, made me feel worse. It just became an extra stressor for me. So the other thing that I was doing was meditating. And it took me some time, many years actually, to get meditation to work for me. But once I did, I think, looking back now, I can see how I was using meditation in some instances to avoid feeling what was going on for me with some of those deeper emotions, because I was able to, not all the time, but I was able to, experience certain states that meant that I wasn't sort of going into perhaps what needed to be felt. So in the end, I actually went and I saw a fantastic therapist who didn't just do talk therapy. She worked a lot with neuroscience and worked a lot with working with the nervous system and the unconscious mind. And I did that for 3 years quite intensely. And I learned some fabulous tools and also had a lived experience of having had them work for me on my fertility journey, and then went on to do some study around proven mindfulness-based therapeutic practices. So a big one of those is acceptance and commitment therapy. And so coming back to your question, Jen, around why is it that we avoid these emotions. And I think there's two reasons for it. I think one of them is that when we're children, our psyche protects us from traumatic events or difficult emotions because it knows that we don't have the self-awareness or the inner resources to process those kinds of emotions. So we go through this process when we're little of kind of splintering those things off, in the hope that as we get older and we develop those skills, that we will have the capacity as an adult to bring some resolution to what hasn't been addressed. The challenge is we're not taught how to do this as adults. And so this kind of leads into this pattern of avoidance, where referred to as experiential avoidance. We're trying to avoid our experiences, our thoughts, feelings, memories, and even the physical sensations that go with emotions, because often, without realizing it, and they've found this through studying addiction, it's actually more than anything the physical sensation of challenging emotions that we're wanting to escape from. So I think that often we form a pattern in childhood of pushing things away, and it's only if we go through something like that's really challenging that forces us to learn to deal with emotions that we might build some strategies. But I think the other thing is a lot of us know we need to lean into our emotions and tend to them, but we just don't have a process for it. And we sit with those emotions and they can feel completely overwhelming, and they can engulf us in a way that it actually doesn't feel safe for us, for our nervous system to sit in it. So this is where having a process to follow can be really important. And that's something that I've certainly tried to build and cultivate. It's something that worked for me. I did a lot of research in this space, and it's really at the heart of what I work with when I'm either working one-on-one or with my online program as well.
Gosh, you said so many insightful things there. Can I just go back to one thing you mentioned initially? It's this idea of talk therapy not being helpful. And, I think for anyone who is going through, especially in the early stages of realizing that fertility isn't going to be something that's easy for you, I think something like talk therapy is incredibly beneficial because it lets us cognitively recognize and intellectualize what we're going through, and to know that we're not alone and how we're feeling is normal, and all of those things that make you feel less alone. I think that's so important. But I have the exact experience myself, and so many of my students will say to me, I've been going to see a therapist for 6 months now, and I just feel worse every time I go. And there is a reason for that. So before we get into some of the processes and tools that you talk about, maybe it all flows in together, can you explain how not working somatically, so not coming into your body to process these emotions, doesn't actually allow you to work through them?
Absolutely. So when we look at emotions, they actually sit in our cells and they can crystallize in our cells. And I think what happens is we fall into this pattern that I described earlier, where I was turning to cognitive behavioral therapy, where it was all very cerebral, but there wasn't a holistic sense of resolution. It's kind of a little bit of a Band-Aid measure. And this is where we can get nervous system imbalances happening when we're not resolving things somatically. The process that I'd love to take you through shortly, I always recommend to people that they do some nervous system regulation before and nervous system regulation afterwards. But we need to be focusing on the body to bring emotional healing. And, when we focus on the body, the mind will follow naturally. So with the work that I did with my therapist, we would do things like EFT tapping, we would do bilateral movement, I would do eye pattern movements, things like that. She would also recommend exercise afterwards, and you would know as a yoga teacher the importance of moving your body and moving things through your system so that as we're releasing and stirring those emotions up, we're actually able to process it physically, and also in some instances bring some sense of relief. So that somatic process is so important, because we are more than just our mind and our emotions. We are a body. And so it's about working on that level as well. I also think that body work is very important. So things like acupuncture, massage, kinesiology are also really important parts of the equation as well.
And we don't appreciate how much our body takes on of what we're feeling and what we've been through. And you might think that you have moved past something and, you know, you've gotten over it. And then, you know, even years later now, I'm not trying to conceive, but I've done so much work to try and, you know, move through all of the trauma I went through as well. But sometimes something will happen and it will trigger me to my core. And that's my body going, still some work to do. So it is so much deeper than we realize, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And I think that this is where, and you probably talked to us about your yoga students, Jen, this is where when we're on the yoga mat, it's so common to have tears come up, and we don't necessarily know where they come from, but that's a perfect example of that release from our system that we experience when we create the right state in the nervous system to facilitate that kind of release.
It's very true, and that happens every day. Yeah. So can you take us through the process that you recommend and do with your students as well?
Yes. So I call this my emotional freedom process, and it's taken a lot. It's a combination of mindfulness-based practices, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is what I really turned to in terms of my study, which is a mindfulness-based practice in and of itself, and just a few other things that I've worked with that really help me. And this is a process that people can practice or step through to meet your emotions and find a way of being able to process them, metabolize them, make space for them without necessarily having to get rid of them or find some sort of resolution. And so that's really where the freedom comes in, because when we're able to meet our emotions as they are and make space for them without having to fix them, it means that we come to this space of being able to experience a sense of peace, a sense of liberation without having to change external circumstances. And that's the journey that I very much took on my fertility journey. So the first step is to notice the emotions. And this is really around sitting in the seat of the observer. And so, you know, practices such as meditation and mindfulness really help to build that. And what you're doing is you're observing your emotion and the bodily sensations that come with that without trying to change or suppress it. And so when you sit in the seat of the observer of your emotion, it's like you're no longer fused with it and it doesn't have the same hold over you. There's some sort of recognition that you are separate from that emotion, even though you're experiencing it. But that separateness helps to reduce that sense of overwhelm. So the first thing is to notice the emotion. The second thing is to name the emotion. So rather than just saying this, I feel really bad, I feel really awful, putting a label such as sadness, anger, or grief, or anxiety is very important, because number one, what this does is it kind of places a container around the emotion. So it's not just this endless ball of overwhelming emotion. It puts a container around it by naming it, which helps to feel more manageable. And the second thing that naming it does is it gives it an identifiable pattern. So when we understand anger or sadness, we know that there's an element of predictability to what we're feeling because we understand what anger or sadness is. And we also know that there's a path for resolution as well when it comes to anger or sadness. So that signals to the nervous system that it's safe, which means that you've then got this strong base of having a sense of separation from the emotion and a sense of containment to then move on to step 3, which I think is where people sort of really start to struggle a little bit normally, and that is being able to sit with the emotion. So sitting with the emotion is having the capacity to notice the urge to suppress it or turn away from it, but instead be able to stay with it. And when we talk about addiction, I mentioned earlier, this capacity to kind of ride this wave is very much what they focus on in working with addictions. It's being able to ride that wave of the desire to reach for something else. And so what we're doing here is getting really curious about the emotion, but in a way that we don't get too entangled with it. So we're not going into stories or analysis. We're just acknowledging it and noticing the sensations and accepting it, and that we know that there's nothing that we need to do with it, but just observe. And so that could delve into things like getting curious about maybe there's a colour to that emotion or a shape, or is it cool? Is it warm? Does it have a movement? What's its density? All of those kinds of things. By getting curious, it gives us something to kind of grab onto in order to be able to move closer to it and sit with it and start to kind of really integrate it. Because what we're working towards is being able to allow the emotion to be there. So I've kind of put two steps together there. The first thing is to sit with the emotion and just resist the urge to pull away. And then step 4 is to really explore it. And that's when we're going into looking at the quality of the felt sense. Then we move into step 5, which is allowing the emotion to be there. And there can be quite a bit of work in that in terms of different options you can use. But instead of moving into that avoidance, it's about trying to create space for that emotion to be there. So firstly, it's acknowledging that it's okay to feel this way. It's normal. It's a normal human experience to have emotions, and remind yourself that you don't need to struggle with it. Your emotions are temporary, and it's just about opening up and making room for it. And perhaps accepting that there will be times when it's more intense, and it's just a process of maybe even closing your eyes and riding that wave of intensity and almost visualizing yourself as the intensity of the emotion rises, riding that wave. And then as it peaks, then noticing as it subsides on the other side. Mm-hmm. There's also, and this is where can be a great process to work with a therapist, but there's also a process that I take people through that's a little bit lengthy that involves making space for the emotion. So it's actually, again, closing your eyes, turning to your breath, and in breathing, it's about making space for that emotion, almost experiencing yourself expanding around that emotion. So it can still be there. We don't need to fix it or eliminate it, but we just have this sense that we're making space. But it's not all of who we are. It's just a part of us, and it can just be there, and we can just expand around it and function in our life the way we normally do. But a really important part of this is, in terms of allowing the emotion, is to meet it with a sense of compassion. And when I first came to this work of allowing emotions, it was through the work of Tara Brach, who, for anyone who doesn't know, she's a psychotherapist, but she's also teaches and writes a lot of books in Buddhist meditation. And she wrote a fabulous book called Radical Compassion. And she's got this 4-step process, which is RAIN, which has kind of got elements of what I'm talking about today. So that might be something that you'd like to look at as well and read. But it's about how can you just meet what is going on with acceptance and make space for it, but meet yourself and the experience of the emotion with compassion. And sometimes what I like to do is consider people pop their hand on themselves and imagine the energy of that hand that they've placed on themselves, having loving energy that might flow through to a child or, their pet or someone like that, and just feel that energy coming into your own body. And as woo-woo as that might sound, and as simple as that might sound, if you take yourself through that process, it can actually be really, really powerful. So those are the 5 steps that I recommend for being able to experience that emotional freedom. It's being able to observe the emotion, name it, put words to it, accept it and sit with it, get curious about it, notice its quality, we're deconstructing it. And that helps you to lean into it more, which then allows you to make space for the emotion, to just accept that it can be there. And occasionally it can rise and peak. We don't need to get rid of it. Sometimes you will get rid of it, and that's good. But you may not always resolve it. And if you don't resolve it, then that's okay too. But what you've done is you've unhooked from that emotion. So it no longer hijacks you. It no longer causes you to engage with your life in a way that you maybe are going to be withdrawing socially too much, or you're so racked with anxiety that you can't function and show up in your life as you normally would. So all the things that make our lives so unworkable during infertility, by helping to make space for our emotions in this way, it's like they're no longer driving the bus, you're in the driver's seat again. And I think the power of it is in the not having to get rid of it. That's, really, really good, because we drop the struggle and we're already struggling with enough. So having this process really is supportive of that.
I love everything that you just shared so much, Sarah. So thank you. Thank you for offering such incredible wisdom there. And just that last thing you said about it isn't about pushing the emotions away, because we are never taught how to work through difficult emotions. I think most of us grew up with parents that tried to push these difficult things that would arise away. So we don't have the tools. And I can absolutely say that even now when something difficult happens in my life, just sitting with it and feeling it might feel terrible, and sitting with those emotions isn't fun, and it's not something we would choose to do if we had a choice. But on the other side, it just makes such an incredible difference. So thank you. And I can't stress enough how much it will make an impact on your journey if you are able to do these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And that cross-section you mentioned about how some things feel a bit woo-woo. And, that's what I love most about these practices like yoga and meditation, where there is a woo-woo element to it, but it is so grounded in science as well.
Absolutely.
And it works. It totally works. So that, it's my passion to blend the woo and the science together is the whole point of this podcast. So thank you.
Look, it's a pleasure. And I think that, I think what is really important is that, you do have a foundation for these kinds of practices, and some of them are things like yoga and meditation. I think that, I should probably touch on trauma too with this practice. But, I think having practices grounded in mindfulness really support this kind of thing. Nervous system regulation through the breathing and the yoga is really important too, because it expands your capacity to meet these kinds of emotions. But I think the other thing that I would really recommend too is that people start really small. There's a concept called titration when it comes to nervous system regulation, and that is that, if you're going to work with emotions, you start really small so that you're not becoming engulfed and overwhelmed, and you do some of those practices, the nervous system regulation, before you would sit down and do a process like this, and then, of course, definitely do it afterwards. And if you sense that you have some form of trauma, I really recommend people work on this with a therapist.
Definitely. And to point out that people think about trauma, we go back to, serious things that happen in childhood or accidents or things like that. But if you've been through a very, very difficult journey of infertility, and gosh, thinking about some of the things that you went through, Sarah, that's trauma as well. So not to discount what you've been through. And definitely, if you suspect that you are suffering from PTSD or dealing with some kind of trauma, then definitely work with a therapist as well. So thank you for sharing that.
That's a pleasure.
Sarah, you have an incredible podcast and some wonderful resources online. So where is the best place people can meet you and reach out to you?
Yes, so I have the Navigating Infertility podcast that can be found on my website, of course, opentolife.net. So opentolife.net. Also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And also I spend a bit of time on Instagram. So that's opentolife_Sarah Reece as well. And I'm also going to be launching or relaunching an 8-week online program next year where these kinds of practices will be very much at the heart of what I do. So, nervous system regulation, work around emotional freedom and mental freedom as well. So I'll definitely be putting some information out about that shortly as well.
Thank you. And I will put links to all of those in the show notes. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. I can't thank you enough. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share it with me by leaving a review so I can keep all this information coming your way. If you aren't already following me on social media, check the links below in the show notes to join me for more daily tips to support your fertility journey. And don't forget to visit my website to learn more about how the beautiful practices of yoga, meditation, and breathwork can support you as you're trying to conceive. Until next time, sending you all my love. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.